Bream, both a Miss America finalist and an attorney. She's currently the host of Fox News at Night and serves as the network's chief legal correspondent. She's also the author of a brand new book that examines inspiring women that you may not have heard of before, or maybe you have. It's called The Women of the Bible Speak, the wisdom of 16 women and their lessons for today. It's out at bookstores right now. It makes a wonderful read for the Easter season. Here's my conversation with Shannon Bream. Shannon, I want to start with, why did you decide to write this book, focusing on these 16 women on the Bible, and how did you choose the women you were going to focus on?
You know, Fox actually came to me with their inaugural class of books under their new book label and said, would you be interested in doing something in this space? And I thought immediately, yes, I would love to tell these stories. A lot of the stories of these women are unknown. We talked about who should be included. I fought for a couple people, including Rahab the prostitute, because I thought, I want this to be a good mix of women. The Bible does not sanitize their stories. They are flawed like we all are. So we do have a prostitute. We've got a queen. We've got a murderer. We have all kinds of people in here. So I wanted to take stories that were a variety of different kinds of women and circumstances, so that hopefully everybody will see some of their own lives in these women and feel inspired about how they got through some very difficult things.
Yeah, no, it's a real mashup. And the way you paired them, we'll get to that in a second, it creates interesting shadows as you go from one woman to the other. You write that these women in your intro are women of truth and reason. Why is that so important now?
I think because they had to be tethered to something, and for most of them here it was faith. Not all of them started off that way, but they ended up that way, trusting God and his direction. And I think so much of the world is very vague and shifting and tethered to all kinds of different things and completely untethered at times. So I know for me and for the women in this book, they found great foundation and roots in something that I believe is eternal and everlasting, and that was their faith in God's promises. So I really think we need that more than ever, and we need to remember his promises and his truths that he's laid out. I think they can be a great guide for us and a great comfort right now too.
Yeah, I agree. You choose to write about these women in pairs. So you have Sarah and Hagar, you have Rachel and Leah, and so on. How did you choose, and why did you choose to pair these women up instead of just writing individual chapters about each particular woman?
Well, some of them made sense. They knew each other, like the Sarah and Hagar collection, but some of them didn't. And we thought there were common principles. I mentioned Queen Esther and Rahab the prostitute. They couldn't be more different, but I wanted to pair them because they both were people who were placed exactly where God needed them to be at exactly the right time to be helpful in saving and creating victory for the Jewish people, for the nation of Israel. So I love that those common themes were there with them. So what we tried to do is where it was obvious and put people together who knew each other to see how they were different and the things that were common in their lives. But I thought too, some of these people lived centuries apart, and there were still important nuggets and principles that sort of bound their stories together. And I thought it might help the readers to understand them more, to see those commonalities.
Now, Shannon, you specifically chose, you mentioned it a moment ago, to include these women that were less than perfect. Tamar is a good example, a woman shunned by Judah after she's left childless following the deaths of Judah's two sons. Tamar concocts this plan to get pregnant, posing as a prostitute to seduce her newly widowed father-in-law. Now, Tamar's account differs much from that of Ruth, whom you pair with her. But both are listed in the genealogy of Jesus in the book of Matthew. What's the lesson there, and what should we take from Tamar?
I love that they were outsiders. So all of us have had some experience in our lives where we feel like we don't belong, or we're kind of on the outside looking in. And both these women, Ruth and Tamar, had moments of that in their lives. They weren't part of the original nation of Israel or the Jewish people, but for different ways, their lives fed into that and became a part of that story. And you mentioned they are in the lineage of Christ. They're included in the Bible, and each of those generations that leads us up to the Savior. So I think, wow, I mean, the fact that God included them in the lineage, and they're mentioned specifically in the Bible leading us to Christ the Savior, they were valued and important. Their stories, as messy as they may have been. And I say that, you know, Tamar's not an easy Bible school lesson, Sunday school lesson that you teach. She was very complicated, but the fact that she did something that probably was not God's perfect plan, but he was able to redeem and use it, I think is a very important lesson, because I don't want people to think you have to have it completely together and be pristine and then you come to God. No, I mean, he can work in your messes, your bad decisions, your getting off track, your disobedience.
Hmm.
When you come back to him, he can redeem all of that. And he certainly did that with Tamar.
Well, I love that you are reviving and reminding people, and it's something that, I've been drawn to in recent years, that you're reminding them of these shadowy figures in the Bible that often are glossated over or people forget about altogether. You're keeping these stories alive, and the fact is, these are great stories. Yes, they're complicated, but these are people of second chances in many cases. People who, through their deep flaws, find their way to redemption, stumble to redemption. Jael is one of my favorite stories that nobody ever talks about her. I mean, she kills this Sisera with a tent peg. What's the lesson here for you, and why did you include her story?
We pair her with Deborah because their stories go together.
That's right.
Deborah was a leader of Israel. So when people say women are sort of second-class citizens or not important in the Bible, Old or New Testament, I always point to Deborah's story because she was leading the nation of Israel as a judge. That was their leadership at the time. So she's solving their disputes, but she also, at that time, God called her to take them into battle against this nation that was oppressing them. Their lives were terrible at that point, and they had begged God for help. So God tells Deborah, listen, this other group that is very much better equipped than you are, they're going to outman you, outgun you essentially. You need to go in battle against them, I'm telling you, and it's going to be great. She goes to her leader, the head of Israel's army, Barak, and says, okay, God told us to get these men together and let's go. He sort of hesitates because anybody looking at this on paper is going to say, this is a bad idea.
Right.
And he says, I'll go, but if you go with me. And she's like, okay, I will do it. He knows she's anointed. We'll go into this together. But because of your hesitance, the opposing general is actually going to be delivered into the hands of a woman. And I always thought as a kid when I heard that story that Deborah was going to be the one who ends up taking out that opposing general, but it's not. It's Jael that we meet later on in the Bible there, who is the one who, as you said, uses the tent peg and kills the bad guy who's been oppressing Israel. So yes, we have a murderer in this book as well. But all of those women, including these two, were put in positions that when God had them to act, they were critical parts of his story and of saving and preserving the nation of Israel. These are powerful women. They are brave, and I would hope I aspire to be more like both of them. Not killing anyone, but stepping up in bravery when God says, I need you to show courage here, and I'll give it to you.
Well, remind me to hide the tent pegs when you're around, Bream. But do you have a favorite woman in the book that who surprised you? I mean, look, you've been immersed in these stories and these women for most of your life. Was there any that really jumped out at you, surprised you, or that you considered her in a new way?
I've always loved the story of the woman who had the issue of bleeding for 12 years. We start the book with her because when we find her in the Gospels, she's mentioned several times in different Gospels. We don't know her name. But at that point, she had exhausted every penny that she had. So here she is with no financial hope. She's got an illness that nobody's been able to cure her from. And what I found in studying here is that she probably was completely outcast at that point. She would have been considered probably unclean, meaning she couldn't worship in the temple or be in the markets or be around crowds. So she hears about this Jesus and she decides, if I can just touch the hem of his garment, that's going to heal me. So what enormous faith that she would go and risk everything. She does get close enough, and that's exactly what happens. She touches his garment. He feels the power go out from him, but he says to her, your faith has made you whole. He gives her credit for reaching out there. Now listen, he could have, when he turned around and said, who touched me? And we know he knows who touched him. He could have blasted her on so many fronts. In fact, we're told in the Gospel, she falls down trembling before him to admit what she's done. And instead of condemning her for being out there while she's unclean and being among this crowd or touching him or his garment without permission or asking, he says to her in every account, the first thing he says to her is, daughter. And he does say to her, your faith has made you whole. So he's showing acceptance of her, not only from him, but to everybody else there, that this woman has done something honorable. Even if she's breaking the norms of the day, she came to me for healing, for help. And you and I have talked before. In my first book, I'm very transparent about living with a chronic illness and chronic pain for a long time. So I've always loved her story, and that Christ stepped up, didn't condemn her in her desperation. Instead, he accepted her. So I love that story.
Yeah. You write of Mary, the mother of Jesus, a blessed mother, that we know very little about her childhood, her parents. You emphasize that after Jesus was crucified and resurrected and ascended into heaven, the disciples gather, including women and Mary, and you write, Mary's presence there at the heart of the first church in that room with his disciples tells us many important things, including that women continued to be a crucial part of the early Christian community. This might not seem strange to us, but in first century Judea, the idea of women being part of a rabbi's group of wandering disciples was unthinkable. Already the first Christian community was looking very different from the world surrounding this. Now, this is something many, I think, don't think about or consider, how significant it was for Mary to be present in that moment. How important is this for us to ponder and remember as we enter Holy Week?
I love it because she was faithful from the beginning. From the minute we meet her, she is blessed among women. I think about being a young woman and an angel shows up. I mean, I would be awestruck and probably speechless at that point. And she has questions, but she feels honored and takes on this divine appointment in her life. I've always studied so much the front end of her life, but I wanted to include in the book as well the part that you talk about how afterwards she was there and was a key pillar of building the church in the beginning. Jesus very much included women. We see that throughout the New Testament. They studied with him, which again wouldn't have been the norm. They were part of his inner circle.
Right.
And his mother, I thought important to see her not just as that young, faithful, blessed young woman, but also all the way through, and the fact that she was faithful. She was there at the cross, viewing the unimaginable, watching her child, knowing he was the Messiah, but seeing him falsely accused and killed before her very eyes. I cannot imagine the pain. But she didn't run from that, and she didn't run from the disciples. She was there in the building of the early church, faithful in prayer. And I think what a beautiful example that we've heard, and we focus so often on the beginning of her birth story, but what about the rest of her life and the faithfulness we see there as well?
Yeah. The last chapter of the book's focused on Jesus and the women. And you write that the life of every woman we've looked at throughout the book can be best understood in Christ. Again and again, we see Jesus interacting with women who needed compassion, whether because of their actions or circumstances beyond their control. He didn't shy away from sinners or women with no status. In fact, he walked right into their stories and into their lives in a way that not only offered them hope centuries ago, but also provides encouragement and inspiration for us today. Is that what you hope people take away from the book?
I do. Thank goodness he's willing to go where sinners are, because that's all of us. And I love that he went to these women, the one accused of adultery that was going to be stoned to death. He had compassion on her. He defended her. He said, they don't condemn you, neither do I. Now go and sin no more. He doesn't condone her sinful activity, but he's not going to condemn her as a human being. The woman at the well, the Samaritan woman, he broke all kinds of norms talking to her, being there alone with her and having this conversation. The Jews and the Samaritan people had great enmity between them. And he broke all of that down, and he didn't argue or judge her or tell her what a terrible person she was and what a mess her life was. He had a conversation with her. He respected her. He led her to her own discovery about who he really was. So I think those are great lessons, that God accepts us as we are. We come to him asking forgiveness and asking for hope, but he is willing to have compassion and not to condemn us. Yes, our sin, but not us as people who are created in his image.
In a recent interview, Shannon, you said you thought you might be done writing books after you wrote The Bright Side, your last book. Are there any plans for future books now? You know this is going to be a New York Times bestseller, Shannon.
Oh, I don't know about that. And listen, if it does, I pray every day that so many people will be reached by this book, encouraged in their faith, or brought to faith for the first time. Maybe they won't pick up a Bible, but they might be interested in these stories. But it definitely excited me in a new way to write and study about these women. And there's so many we didn't include. So who knows? Maybe there will be a part 2 one day.
A sequel. The women of the Bible keep speaking. Shannon Bream,
Yes.
remind me, I'm going to hide all the tent pegs anytime I see you, and I hope it's a huge bestseller. I know it's certainly fascinating to so many people. And when I go on the Amazon page of my Thief Who Stole Heaven book, one of the books that always people are buying with it is your book. So there's something out there. People are, I think they're looking to reconnect with tradition and something eternal that speaks to their lived daily experience, and you're giving them that. So the women of the Bible
I'm in
speak.
good company.
Well, I am too. Thank you, my friend. Happy Easter.
Thank you. To you as well, Raymond.
The Women of the Bible Speak, The Wisdom of 16 Women and Their Lessons for Today by Shannon Bream is available now at bookstores everywhere and online. And you can catch Shannon every weeknight on Fox News at night at midnight Eastern starting Monday.